Well, hi everyone. On Monday, June 8th, around 7:37 in the morning local time, there was a major earthquake in the Philippines. So in today's video, I want to talk about the type of damage that occurred, the specific mechanisms for this type of earthquake, and what type of similar earthquakes could occur in other places around the world. So I'm going to start with this first video. It just shows you the terror that can happen with people with an unexpected event like this. So that was at a school. You see a number of buildings that suffered extensive damage. There were landslides that were triggered. There's more building damage. This is building damage at a Jollibee restaurant. There was reports that this restaurant's open 24 hours a day, and there were workers present when this earthquake occurred. At the time of this recording, I'm recording this video on June 13th, 2026. There have been 35 confirmed deaths and over 20,000 people that have been displaced from their homes. So again, the location of the earthquake, and there are different types of plate boundaries. You can have convergent or divergent plate boundaries, as well as transform plate boundaries. I'm going to give you an example of each. So, for example, the plate boundary that produced the Himalaya mountains is from India slamming into the Eurasia plate. This has been going on for millions of years. Then you have a transform plate boundary, for example, the San Andreas Fault, where you have one plate slipping past the other is a type of plate boundary. Going back to India, you have continental plates, two continental plates that are converging or smashing directly into each other, and there's no place for the continental crust to go except up. Now, in the case of the plate boundary that produced the Philippine earthquake, it's a convergent plate boundary between an ocean plate and a continental plate. And when that happens, the ocean plate dives underneath the continental plate. And as that plate goes deeper into the mantle, it heats up and melts and produces a ring of volcanoes. Of course, the Philippines has numerous volcanoes. I mentioned in a previous video about the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the early 90s. And this type of subduction zone plate boundaries produce very large earthquakes. And here we see a map of various subduction zones around the world. In the United States, the major subduction zone is the Cascadia subduction zone. And eventually, it's expected that that plate boundary will produce an earthquake in excess of magnitude 9. And if even just a portion of that plate boundary moves and generates an earthquake, it'll be in the range of 8.0 to 8.6. So still a major quake, and the odds of that occurring in the next 50 years is around 40%. So I would hate to be in the Pacific Northwest when that thing cuts loose. And it's going to happen eventually. I mean, it could be thousands of years from now, but the odds are pretty high that it can happen in the next 50 years. And if it does, the estimates are that it could kill around 14,000 people. So, how big exactly was this earthquake in the Philippines? There's a really good article from Scientific American, and I've got the links to these stories in the description to this video. In this article, they mentioned it was a magnitude 7.8 quake, and the severity of the ground shaking was an 8 on the modified Mercalli intensity scale. So we have the Richter scale, which is a measure of the amplitude that's recorded for the earthquake by a seismograph. And here's the seismogram from a seismograph, and you can see the amplitude or how high that peak occurs above baseline. And it's recorded with this seismograph right here. Now, going to the modified Mercalli scale, this was indicated as an 8. So, damage slight in buildings designed to be earthquake resistant but severe in some poorly built structures, widespread fall of chimneys and monuments. And what's interesting about this scale is you can go back to historical records, back to antiquity, and get an idea based on description from eyewitnesses how big an earthquake was. For example, if there's historical reports of plates being shaken out of a cabinet, for example. You can get an idea of where it falls on the modified Mercalli scale. And I put a link to this video in the description here. I did this video early on in the history of this channel, but I thought it was very interesting. There are geologists that were trying to find out the magnitude of historical earthquakes in Southern California by looking at outcrops of exfoliated granites, a type of mechanical weathering. And it created these pedestals of granite that hadn't fallen over. And so they went back and estimated how much ground shaking would have to occur in order to knock some of these uh, boulder pedestals over. And they got a pretty accurate idea of historical earthquake magnitudes, which I thought was very interesting. Now, whenever there's a major earthquake like this, there's a lot learned. There's usually revisions to building codes. There's discoveries of design deficiencies, construction deficiencies, code enforcement deficiencies. This happens around the world. This happened in Northern California in 1989 after Loma Prieta. This happened in the early 90s in Southern California when structures that were thought to be seismically resistant turned out to be not so much. And again, there were code revisions as a result. But in general, if you're looking to live overseas and you're concerned about earthquake hazards, you would generally want to live in a modern high rise, one that's been constructed in the last few years. And in general, those types of structures are held to a very high international building code standard. Buildings that tend to not do so well are low rise buildings, typically residential and other commercial buildings. And that's what we saw from those various photos of damage for buildings throughout the Philippines. I previously did a video about this building collapse that occurred during construction on May 24th, 2026 in Angeles City. It had nothing to do with this earthquake that occurred on June 8th, 2026. So this building that fell down was over 600 miles away from the epicenter of this recent earthquake. And then given the timing, obviously it had nothing to do with the earthquake, but it just makes you wonder that if there had been similar buildings of this type of construction nearer to the epicenter, the results would have been far more disastrous. As I mentioned, so far 35 confirmed deaths from this earthquake, but around 20,000 people have been displaced from their homes. So I'll continue to follow this story. I haven't done a book recommendation for a while, and so today I want to mention a book I read just last week. Anton Chekhov, a Russian novelist. He published a series of short stories in 1898. I've been reading a lot of books from the mid 19th century to the mid 20th century. I've been really enjoying these classic books. This is a collection of short stories that I thought were really interesting. My favorite story in the book is The Black Monk. I'm not going to give anything away there, but if you're so inclined to check out this book, I've got a link in the description. With that, I want to send a shout out to those of you who have contributed to buy me a coffee. That's one of the better ways to support this channel. I also want to thank the channel members and those of you who've contributed to Super Things. Additional great ways to support what we're doing here. So thanks very much, everyone.